The Bellevue ballroom glittered with the kind of splendor that only money could buy. Crystal chandeliers reflected light across silk dresses and tailored suits, while champagne flowed like water. It was William Harrison's engagement party, heir to Harrison Enterprises, and every important figure in New York had gathered to witness it. William, a 35-year-old man with the elegant bearing of someone who had never known need, observed the scene from a corner, feeling an inexplicable emptiness in his chest. Everything he saw, the smiling faces, the clinking glasses, the orchestra playing, seemed part of a theatrical production in which he participated without feeling any real connection. Sometimes the decisions we believe are right are simply those that others expect us to make, he thought, as his gaze wandered across the ballroom until it stopped, as if drawn by an invisible force, on a figure who stood out amid the opulence. Sarah James, a woman with chestnut hair pulled back in a simple bun, served glasses with natural grace. She wore the black uniform of the catering staff, but there was something in her gaze, a mixture of determination and sweetness, that instantly captured William's attention. He watched her politely decline the condescending behavior of a guest, maintaining a dignity that seemed to shine brighter than all the jewels present in that room. That's when it happened. Sarah, turning to take another tray, accidentally spilled a glass on Victoria Foster's dress, William's fiancée. Victoria's cry of indignation cut through the music like a knife. "You idiot! Do you have any idea how much this dress costs?" Victoria exclaimed, as guests turned to watch the spectacle. William saw Sarah's face pale, not with fear, but with calm dignity. "I'm very sorry, Ma'am," she responded firmly. "I assure you the stain will come out with proper treatment." Victoria, a beautiful woman, accustomed to having everything revolve around her, raised her hand, as if to slap Sarah. That's when William, moved by an impulse he didn't fully understand, crossed the ballroom in seconds and caught his fiancée's wrist in mid-air. "Enough, Victoria," he said, with a calmness that contrasted with the storm he felt inside. The entire ballroom fell silent. Margaret Harrison, the family matriarch and William's mother, watched the scene with calculating eyes from the main table. No one dared breathe as William gently released Victoria's hand and turned to Sarah. "Are you all right?" he asked with a gentleness that surprised even himself. Sarah nodded, confused by the intervention. Her eyes, a deep brown, met William's, and something inexplicable happened in that instant. A recognition, a connection that transcended words and circumstances. Sometimes we spend our lives searching for something without knowing what it is, until one day we find it in the most unexpected place, William thought, as he felt the world around him fade away, leaving only that gaze that seemed to see through the layers of privilege and social expectations that had defined his entire life. No one could imagine that this brief encounter, in the middle of a party meant to celebrate an engagement, would be the beginning of a story that would challenge all social conventions and forever change the destiny of two people who should never have met. The alarm went off at 5 in the morning, pulling Sarah from a dream in which for once she didn't have to worry about making ends meet. She turned off the alarm with an automatic movement and stared at the cracked ceiling of her small apartment in Queens. Outside, New York was barely waking up. She got up quietly, careful not to wake Ethan, her 8-year-old son, who was sleeping peacefully in the adjacent room. The boy needed to rest. The fever from the night before seemed to have subsided, but Sarah couldn't afford the luxury of missing any of her 3 jobs. The medications for Ethan's chronic respiratory condition were too expensive. The kitchen, small but immaculate, witnessed Sarah's morning rituals. She prepared coffee and organized Ethan's medications so that Mrs. Parker, the neighbor who looked after the boy while she worked, would know exactly what to give him and when. "Mom, are you leaving already?" Ethan's sleepy voice surprised her. Sarah turned to find her son in the kitchen doorway, with tousled hair and still drowsy eyes. She knelt to his height and kissed his forehead, checking that he no longer had a fever. "Yes, honey. I have to go clean the offices before my shift at the coffee shop," she explained, while caressing his cheek. "But Mrs. Parker will come soon to take you to school. Remember to take your medicine after breakfast." Ethan nodded with that maturity unusual for his age, the kind that children develop when they learn too early about life's difficulties. "Can I go to my music class today?" he asked with a hopeful gleam in his eyes. Sarah's heart tightened. The music classes at the community center were the only extracurricular activity she could afford, and Ethan showed a natural talent that she didn't want to see wasted due to lack of resources. "Of course," she replied with a smile, deciding she would work an extra hour to make up for the expense. Miles away emotionally, but just 20 minutes by car, William Harrison contemplated New York from the window of his penthouse in a luxury high-rise. The city stretched out beneath him like a kingdom of which he was, in a way, one of the invisible rulers. Harrison Enterprises had a stake in half a dozen of the buildings he could see from there. He hadn't slept well. The image of that waitress and her dignity in the face of public humiliation was still etched in his mind. He had abruptly cancelled the party after the incident, to the dismay of the guests and the fury of Victoria, who couldn't understand how a simple accident with the staff could ruin the most important night of their lives. The sound of his phone pulled him from his thoughts. It was Richard Collins, his longtime business rival and childhood friend turned competitor. "William, I see you're still putting on quite a show. New York's high society is talking about nothing else." Richard's voice distilled that mixture of mockery and envy he always employed with him. "If you're calling to gossip, Richard, you'll have to find someone else." "I'm busy," William responded dryly. "No, I was calling to remind you about the board meeting at Mediterranean Investments. Your mother has been pulling strings to increase Harrison Enterprises' stake, and I think we should talk beforehand." William sighed. Business never rested, especially when Margaret was involved. His mother, widowed for 15 years, ran the family empire with an iron fist, and the marriage to Victoria, daughter of the Secretary of Commerce, was part of her strategy to expand the Harrisons' influence. "I'll be there," he replied before hanging up. He headed to the marble bathroom of his suite to shower, but stopped in front of the mirror. He didn't recognize the man who looked back at him, impeccably shaved with the first grey at his temples, giving him a distinguished air, and an expression of, what was it? Weariness? Resignation? "When was the last time I did something I truly wanted, and not what was expected of me?" He wondered as the hot water fell over his body, failing to relax the tension he had felt since the night before. At 7:30 in the morning, Sarah entered through the back door of the imposing glass building that housed several companies, including a subsidiary of Harrison Enterprises, although she was unaware of this. With her cleaning uniform and hair tucked under a cap, she became almost invisible to the executives who were beginning to arrive. She cleaned with methodical efficiency, taking the opportunity to mentally review the topics she would study that night in her nursing courses. At 29, Sarah had promised herself that she wouldn't spend the rest of her life cleaning offices, not after having abandoned her studies when she became pregnant with Ethan and Jason, the boy's father, disappeared without a trace. "Good morning," a male voice startled her as she cleaned one of the main offices. As she turned, her heart skipped a beat. In front of her was the man from the party, the one who had stopped the woman with the ruined dress. Without the formal suit, he looked different, but his eyes were unmistakable, grey like a stormy sky. "Good morning, sir," Sarah responded, lowering her gaze and wondering what he was doing there so early, when the other executives hadn't yet arrived. William observed her, recognizing her immediately despite the change in attire. There was something in her posture, in the way she held her head despite performing a job that many would consider menial, that made her stand out. "We met last night under unfortunate circumstances," he said, taking a step toward her. "I wanted to apologize for my fiancé's behavior." Sarah raised her gaze, surprised by the apology. "It's not necessary, sir. It was an accident, and handling such situations is part of my job," she responded, with a dignity that impressed William once again. A silence charged with inexplicable tension followed. William found himself speechless, something unusual for a man accustomed to dominating any conversation. "My name is William," he finally said, extending his hand in a gesture that broke all established social barriers. Sarah hesitated a moment before shaking it. "Sarah," she replied simply, feeling an electric current run through her skin at the contact with his. Neither of them could imagine that this second encounter, seemingly casual, would be the first of many that would challenge the established order of their worlds, so different and seemingly incompatible. The pediatric clinic at Memorial Hospital was a hive of activity that morning. Sarah waited patiently for her turn, holding Ethan's hand while mentally calculating how much the new inhaler that the doctor would surely prescribe would cost. Beside her, the boy calmly drew in a notebook, oblivious to his mother's financial concerns. "Ethan James," the nurse called from the door. Sarah stood up, collecting her worn but clean coat and the bag where she kept all her son's medical reports. Dr. Ramirez greeted them with a warm smile that transformed into concern as she examined Ethan. "The condition has worsened, Sarah," she explained after the examination. "He'll need a more aggressive treatment to control the asthma." The words hit Sarah like an invisible fist. More medications meant more expenses, perhaps even a fourth job. "Isn't there some alternative?" she asked, trying to keep her voice from revealing her desperation. The doctor looked at her sympathetically. She knew Sarah's situation well. She was one of those patients who never missed an appointment, who followed all instructions to the letter, but for whom each visit represented a considerable economic sacrifice. "There's a new assistance program for cases like Ethan's," she commented, looking for some forms in her desk. "Funded by a private foundation, it covers all medications and specialized treatments." Sarah's eyes lit up with hope, only to dim seconds later. "What are the requirements? Normally these programs have endless waiting lists." The doctor smiled mysteriously. "This one is different. In fact, the program has just been implemented, and we're selecting the first beneficiaries. So I think Ethan would be a perfect candidate." What Sarah didn't know, what she couldn't even imagine, was that this foundation had been created just 3 days earlier by William Harrison, who, after their encounter in the office, had made discreet inquiries about her and her situation. Meanwhile, in the central offices of Harrison Enterprises, William faced his mother's scrutinizing gaze. Margaret, at 65, was still an imposing woman, with perfectly dyed hair and a posture that denoted absolute authority. "What exactly are you doing, William?" she asked directly, not bothering to greet him. "First the spectacle at the engagement party, then the hasty creation of that foundation for sick children. Victoria is devastated, and her father, I remind you, is crucial for our expansion in the energy sector." William remained calm, as he always did in the face of his mother's emotional storms. "The foundation is a project I've had in mind for some time," he lied fluently. "As for Victoria, I spoke with her this morning. We're fine." Margaret narrowed her eyes, unconvinced. "You've always been a terrible liar, son. I know you better than anyone." She made a calculated pause. "Does this have anything to do with that waitress?" William's face remained impassive, but a muscle in his jaw tensed imperceptibly. It was enough confirmation for Margaret. "For God's sake, William, you can't be serious. A servant. You're 35, not 15. These romantic fantasies are unbecoming of a man in your position." "I don't know what you're talking about, Mother," he responded coldly. "And I would appreciate it if you didn't refer that way to people who work honestly." Margaret let out a laugh devoid of humor. "Working honestly isn't enough in our world, and you know it. The Harrison name carries responsibilities, traditions, alliances. Your father didn't build this empire for you to risk it on a whim." The mention of his father touched a sensitive fiber in William. Thomas Harrison had been a hard but fair man who, unlike his wife, valued merit above lineage. His premature death had left a void that Margaret had filled with her own ambitions. "I won't risk anything, Mother," William finally responded, "but I won't allow you to continue directing my life as if it were one of your companies." With those words, he stood up and left the office, leaving Margaret with an expression that oscillated between surprise and calculating determination. Destiny, that invisible playwright, continued weaving its threads. That same afternoon, Sarah received a call from the hospital, informing her that Ethan had been accepted into the medical assistance program. The news was like a miracle fallen from heaven, and although part of her wondered why they had been chosen so quickly, gratitude overcame any suspicion. What Sarah didn't know was that, while she celebrated this small victory with Ethan, William Harrison had made a decision that would change the course of both their lives, to present himself to her not as the powerful businessman he was, but as William Reed, a modest financial advisor. Only this way, he thought, could he truly get to know this woman who, without intending to, had called into question everything he thought he knew about himself and about what really mattered in life. "The masks we use to protect ourselves sometimes end up becoming the cages that imprison us," he reflected, as he contemplated the sunset from his office, determined to shed, at least temporarily, the weight of his surname and his fortune. The Sweet Home Cafe, located on a quiet corner in Queens, was Sarah's second job. From 7 to 3 she cleaned offices, and from 4 to 9 she served coffee and pastries in this family establishment run by Dorothy, an older woman who treated her like the daughter she never had. That Thursday afternoon, as Sarah prepared a latte, the doorbell announced the entry of a new customer. Without looking up from the coffee machine, she pronounced the usual greeting, "Good afternoon, welcome to Sweet Home." "Good afternoon, Sarah." The deep, familiar voice made her almost spill the coffee. She looked up to meet William's grey eyes, dressed with a simplicity that contrasted with the elegance he had shown in their previous encounters. He wore jeans, a blue shirt, and a casual jacket. He seemed like a different man. "Mr. She began, not knowing how to address him outside the formal context of the office. "William, please," he interrupted with a smile that softened his usually serious features. "What a coincidence finding you here." Sarah knew it couldn't be a coincidence. The cafe was too far from the financial district, in a neighborhood that men like him rarely visited. However, she detected no malice in his gaze, only a genuine interest that disconcerted her. "What can I serve you?" "William?" she asked, regaining her professional composure. "A black coffee, please, and if it's not too much trouble, I'd like to talk to you for a moment when you have a break." The request took her by surprise. Dorothy, who was observing the scene from the cash register, gestured to indicate that she could take a few minutes. With some reluctance, Sarah removed her apron and led William to a table in the quietest corner of the establishment. "I don't understand what you're doing here," she said directly once seated. "If it's about the party, I already told you it's forgotten." William observed her attentively. Without the cleaning uniform or the waitress one, simply as Sarah, she was even more impressive. There was a strength in her gaze that few people possessed. "It's not about the party," he responded with sincerity. "The truth is, I wanted to get to know you better. There's something about you that intrigues me." Sarah let out a nervous laugh, uncomfortable with the direct declaration. "Me intriguing you? I'm the least intriguing person I know. I work, study, take care of my son. There's no mystery." "On the contrary," he gently rebuffed, "in a world where everyone seems to want to appear to be more than they are, your authenticity is refreshing." The observation, unexpectedly perceptive, disarmed Sarah. She wasn't accustomed to someone, let alone a man like him, seeing beyond her socio-economic condition. "I don't know what to say," she confessed, "except that I should ask about your intentions, because if you're looking for—" She left the sentence incomplete, but her gaze made clear what she was referring to. William leaned forward, with a sudden seriousness. "No, Sarah, it's not that. You have my word." He paused, carefully choosing his words. "Look, I'm going to be completely honest. I find myself at a point in my life where I'm questioning many things. My work, my relationships, the expectations that weigh on me, and then you appear with this unbreakable dignity, and I wonder how it's possible to maintain that integrity in such a complicated world." The sincerity in his voice surprised Sarah as much as his words. She had expected many things, from an indecent proposition to a condescending job offer, but not this almost confessional vulnerability. "I'm no role model," she finally responded. "I'm just trying to do the best for my son. And about integrity, when you have nothing else, it's the only thing you can hold on to." William nodded, moved by the depth of that simple truth. "I have a proposal for you," he said after a moment. "Allow me to be your friend. No ulterior motives, no hidden agendas, just two people getting to know each other." Sarah looked at him skeptically. "Friends? You and I live in completely different worlds. I don't see how it would work." "Perhaps that's precisely why it would work," William responded with a smile. "And please call me Will. You make me feel like my father when you call me William." Something in that smile, in the way it transformed his normally serious face, made Sarah momentarily lower her defenses. "All right, Will," she conceded. "But with one condition. If at any point I feel this is going in a direction I don't like, it's over. No questions, no insistence." "That seems fair," he accepted, extending his hand to seal the agreement. As she shook it, Sarah felt that strange electric current again. She told herself it was just nervousness, that it meant nothing, but deep down a part of her knew she had just opened a door that would change her life forever. What Sarah couldn't imagine was that, While they were establishing this unusual friendship, Margaret Harrison had already set in motion her own investigation about her. The Harrison matriarch never left anything to chance, especially when it came to the future of her only son and heir. Sometimes, the most significant coincidences in our lives are precisely those that were never coincidences at all, Sarah would think months later, upon discovering the whole truth about the man who was sitting across from her, looking at her as if she were the most valuable find of his life. The Queen's Community Centre buzzed with activity that Saturday morning. Parents, grandparents, and siblings filled the small auditorium for the students' semi-annual music recital. Sarah, seated in the front row, nervously adjusted the collar of Ethan's shirt, who was waiting for his turn to go on stage with his violin. "Mom, you're choking me," the boy protested, pushing her hands away with a smile. Sarah leaned back, exhaling deeply. "I'm sorry, honey, I'm more nervous than you," she confessed, kissing his forehead. "Go prepare with the other children. I'll be here, applauding louder than anyone." Ethan nodded and joined the group of young musicians waiting backstage. At 8 years old, he showed a remarkable talent that his music teacher never stopped praising. A natural gift, he had called it, suggesting private lessons that Sarah couldn't afford. While waiting for the recital to begin, she felt someone sit in the empty seat beside her. Turning her head, her heart skipped a beat as she recognized William. "What are you doing here?" she asked in a surprised whisper. 3 weeks had passed since their encounter at the cafe, and since then they had seen each other several times, always in public and casual places. A walk in Central Park, a quick coffee during Sarah's break, a visit to a free exhibition at a cultural center. Each meeting reinforced an unlikely friendship that nevertheless seemed to work naturally. "So you mentioned Ethan's recital, and I thought I'd come to support you both," William responded simply, as if it were the most normal thing in the world for a supposed financial advisor, for that was how he had introduced himself to her, to attend the school recital of a child he barely knew. Sarah felt a warmth expand in her chest at this gesture. No one, except Mrs. Parker and Dorothy, had shown so much interest in Ethan. "Thank you," she said simply, unable to express how much it meant to her not to be alone at that moment. The recital began with the youngest students, performing simple pieces with more enthusiasm than precision. Parents applauded fervently for each performance, regardless of occasional mistakes. When Ethan's turn came, Sarah involuntarily tensed. The boy took the stage with a seriousness unusual for his age. He placed the violin under his chin, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first notes of Vivaldi's Summer filled the hall, interpreted with a sensitivity that left many open-mouthed. It wasn't a technically perfect performance, but there was something in the way Ethan felt the music that transcended mere correctness. Sarah watched her son with pride, holding back tears. Beside her, William remained absolutely still, captivated by the performance. When Ethan finished, he was the first to stand and applaud, initiating an ovation that made the young violinist blush. "He's extraordinary," William commented as they left the auditorium after the recital. "He has an uncommon talent." Ethan, walking ahead of them, pretended not to listen, though his reddened ears betrayed his attention. "His teacher says the same," Sarah responded with a mixture of pride and resignation. "But advanced classes are expensive, and the violin he uses is borrowed from the community center." William observed the boy, recognizing something familiar in him, the same intensity, the same passion he himself had felt for music in his youth before the responsibilities of the Harrison empire pulled him away from that path. "Could we get ice cream to celebrate?" he proposed, addressing Ethan directly. "If your mother thinks it's okay, of course." The boy looked at Sarah with pleading eyes. She hesitated for a moment. Until now, she had kept William separate from her life with Ethan, fearing to confuse her son or create expectations that might not be fulfilled later. But the genuine admiration William had shown for Ethan's talent, and the respectful way he addressed him as an equal, made her yield. "All right, but just for a while." "I have to study this afternoon," she responded, prompting a victory gesture from Ethan. The neighborhood ice cream shop was a family establishment where everyone knew each other. Upon entering with William, Sarah noticed the curious glances of the neighbors. It wasn't common to see her accompanied by a man, let alone one whose appearance, despite the casual clothes, betrayed an education and position different from those usual in Queens. "Do you play an instrument too?" Ethan asked William while devouring a chocolate ice cream. The question seemed to surprise the man, who smiled nostalgically. Piano. From age 6 until other obligations took up my time, he responded, with a touch of melancholy that didn't go unnoticed by Sarah. Why did you stop? The boy insisted, with the direct curiosity of childhood. William looked at Ethan, considering how to answer that seemingly simple but profound question. Because sometimes, Ethan, adults forget what truly makes us happy, he answered with an honesty that moved Sarah. We let ourselves be carried along by what others expect of us, by what seems practical or sensible, and before we know it, we've lost touch with that part of ourselves. Ethan nodded, assimilating the response with a surprising seriousness for his age. My mum says I should never stop doing what I love, no matter what others say, he said, looking at Sarah with adoration. Your mum is very wise, William responded, sharing a knowing look with Sarah that made her heart inexplicably accelerate. The rest of the afternoon passed with a naturalness that surprised Sarah. William and Ethan connected immediately, discovering common ground in their love for music and old comics that they discovered they both collected. There was nothing forced in their interaction, no attempt by William to win over the boy or impress him with grand gestures. Just a genuine attention that Ethan, accustomed to the absence of male figures in his life, absorbed like a sponge. When the time came to say goodbye, Ethan surprised both adults with an unexpected question. Will you come to my next recital too, Will? Sarah held her breath, unsure of how William would respond to this first step toward a deeper involvement in their lives. I wouldn't miss it for the world, he responded with a smile that lit up his normally serious face, completely transforming it. As they watched William walk away, Sarah felt a contradictory mixture of emotions. On one hand, the joy of seeing Ethan so happy, so connected with William. On the other, the fear of what this new presence in their lives might mean. She had carefully built a world for herself and her son, a safe refuge after Jason's abandonment. Now that world seemed to be opening to new possibilities, as promising as they were terrifying. The deepest connections often arise from the notes that aren't played, from the silences between words, Sarah thought that night, as she listened to Ethan practice a new piece, with a renewed dedication after the encounter with William. What neither of them could know was that, at that very moment, Victoria Foster was returning to New York after a month in Paris, determined to win back her fiancé and the future she considered hers by right. The art gallery in the Upper East Side gleamed with artificial lights that enhanced the exhibited works. It was the opening of a show of young American artists, sponsored in part by the Harrison Foundation, although Sarah, who had been personally invited by William, was unaware of this detail. Nervous, she adjusted the collar of her black dress, the only one she owned for special occasions, and checked her reflection in her phone screen. She felt out of place among the elegant crowd circulating with champagne flutes, discussing painting techniques and artistic trends with a familiarity she did not possess. You look beautiful, William's voice behind her startled her. As she turned, Sarah couldn't help her heart from racing. William, in a dark suit that accentuated his broad shoulders and athletic figure, was incredibly handsome. During the 2 months of friendship they had shared, she had tried to ignore the physical attraction she felt toward him, constantly reminding herself of the differences that separated them. Thanks for inviting me, she responded, striving to maintain a casual tone. Although I don't know much about contemporary art. William offered his arm with a smile that transformed his usually serious face. It's not about knowing, but feeling, he said, as he guided her among the works. Art is like the music Ethan plays. You don't need to be an expert for it to move you. The comparison made Sarah smile. In recent weeks, William had begun to give informal advice to Ethan about music. They had even improvised some piano lessons on the old instrument at the community center. Seeing her son flourish under this new positive male influence filled Sarah with a gratitude that sometimes threatened to become something deeper. They stopped in front of an abstract canvas dominated by blue and gray tones. What do you see? William asked, observing her with genuine interest. Sarah studied the painting, allowing herself to feel rather than analyze. I see loneliness, she finally responded, but also hope, as if there were a light trying to break through the storm. William looked at her with an intensity that made her blush. Exactly what I see, he murmured, and for a moment the world around them seemed to vanish. The spell was broken when a female voice, elegant but with a sharp edge, interrupted them. "William, darling, I've been looking for you everywhere." Sarah turned to find an impressive woman, tall with perfectly styled blonde hair and a designer dress that probably cost more than the annual rent of Sarah's apartment. But what impacted her most was the immediate recognition. She was the woman with the stained dress, William's fiancée. "Victoria." William's voice acquired a cold tone that Sarah had never heard from him. "I didn't know you'd be coming." "Clearly," Victoria responded with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, while evaluating Sarah from head to toe. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" The slight emphasis on the last word didn't go unnoticed by Sarah, who felt the blood drain from her face. Fiancé. William had never mentioned being engaged. In fact, in their conversations, he had always implied he was single. "Sarah James," she introduced herself, regaining her composure. "Pleased to meet you." "Victoria Foster," the woman responded with a perfect but glacial smile. "William's fiancée, although lately it seems he forgets that." The tension was palpable. William seemed caught between two fires, his tense jaw betraying his discomfort. "If you'll excuse me," Sarah said, taking a step back, "I think I need some air." Without waiting for a response, she quickly moved away, zigzagging between groups of attendees until reaching the exit. Once on the street, she breathed deeply the fresh night air of New York, trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions that invaded her. How had she been so naive? Of course, a man like William had commitments, responsibilities, a complete life in which she was barely a curious parenthesis. The friendship she had begun to value so much, and even the deeper feelings she had tried to deny, now seemed a ridiculous fantasy. She was about to call a taxi when she felt a hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, please wait." William's voice sounded almost pleading. She turned, confronting him with a hurt look that made him step back. "Your fiancé? Seriously, Will? When were you going to mention it? Or is it normal for you to spend time with other women while engaged?" William's expression reflected genuine regret. "It's not what it seems. Victoria and I, it's complicated." "Complicated?" Sarah repeated with disbelief. "No, Will. Complicated is working 3 shifts to pay for your son's medicine. Complicated is studying after 16 hours of work. What you're doing isn't complicated, it's dishonest." The words hit William like a physical punch. In the time they had known each other, he had come to deeply admire Sarah's integrity, her unwavering honesty, despite difficulties. And now, he himself had betrayed those values. "You're right," he admitted, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "I owe you the truth, the whole truth." Sarah crossed her arms, waiting. "Victoria and I are engaged, yes. An arrangement practically made since we were teenagers. Our families—" He stopped, aware that he was about to reveal too much about his true identity. "It's a relationship that exists more on paper than in reality. After the engagement party, I made it clear to her that I needed time to reconsider things. She went to Paris and I found you." The sincerity in his voice was palpable, but Sarah felt there was something more, something William was still hiding. "And what am I exactly, Will? A distraction while you decide if you want to fulfill your duty?" "No," he responded vehemently, moving closer until barely inches separated them. "You're the most authentic person I've ever met. With you, I can be myself, without pretenses, without expectations. These 2 months have been the most real of my entire life." The intensity of his gaze, the vulnerability in his voice, made Sarah's defenses waver. But the memory of Jason, of his empty promises before abandoning her while pregnant, kept her firm. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this," she finally said. "I can't be the other woman, or the friend who complicates your engagement, or whatever it is we're doing. I have a son, Will. I can't afford emotional entanglements that will end up hurting us both." William wanted to protest, explain more, but something in Sarah's determination made him understand it was futile to insist at that moment. "At least let me take you home," he offered. "No," she responded firmly. "I think we need distance. Goodbye, Will." As she walked toward the bus stop, Sarah fought against the tears that threatened to spill. She had promised herself not to fall into romantic illusions after Jason, to focus only on Ethan and on building a better future for both of them. How had she allowed William to get so close? What Sarah couldn't know was that, as she boarded the night bus, William was returning to the gallery to confront Victoria, and for the first time in his life, make a decision that went against all the family and social expectations that had defined his existence until then. Sometimes the price of honesty is losing what we value most, but the cost of lying is losing who we truly are, William thought as he watched the bus drive away, taking with it the woman who, without intending to, had forever changed his perception of the world and of himself. Margaret Harrison's office, located on the top floor of the Harrison Building in the heart of Manhattan, offered a panoramic view of New York that many would envy. However, the matriarch barely noticed it as she coldly observed her son, who stood before her with a determination she had rarely seen in him. "Break the engagement? Have you completely lost your mind, William?" Margaret's voice, always controlled, barely contained her indignation. "Victoria's father is fundamental to our expansion in the energy sector. Do you have any idea of the damage you'll cause to the company, to your father's legacy?" William, who in the 2 weeks since the incident at the gallery had unsuccessfully tried to contact Sarah, maintained his composure. "I know perfectly well, Mother, but I cannot marry a woman I don't love, no matter how much it benefits Harrison Enterprises." Margaret rose from her leather chair, her small but imposing figure. "Love," she pronounced the word as if it were a concept foreign to her understanding. "Since when are important decisions made based on passing sentiments? Your father and I married for convenience, and together we built both this empire and a respectable family." "Times have changed, Mother," William responded calmly. "And with all due respect, I don't think your marriage to father was precisely an example of marital happiness." The comment, which touched on a truth never openly mentioned in the family, made Margaret narrow her eyes dangerously. "Be careful, son," she warned. "You're playing with fire. If this has to do with that woman, that cleaning lady with a son, I have news for you." William visibly tensed. Although he had never mentioned Sarah to his mother after that first conversation, he knew Margaret had resources to find out anything she set her mind to. "Sarah has nothing to do with my decision," he lied, maintaining a neutral tone. "I've simply reconsidered my future." Margaret let out a dry laugh, devoid of humor. "Do you know who your friend Sarah really is?" she asked, taking a folder from her desk. "My private investigator has been very thorough. Sarah James, 29 years old, single mother of Ethan James, 8 years old, abandoned by the child's father, Jason Miller, who disappeared when she was 5 months pregnant, works as a cleaner at Harrison Office Solutions and in the afternoons at a cafe in Queens, studies nursing remotely. Her son suffers from chronic asthma, recently benefited by the medical program of your new foundation, created, curiously, right after meeting her." Each correct detail his mother mentioned was like a dagger for William, not because the information was compromising, but because it confirmed the extent to which Margaret had invaded Sarah's privacy. "And what are you trying to prove with this?" he asked, striving to remain calm. "Everything you've mentioned only confirms what I already know. Sarah is an extraordinary woman who has overcome difficult circumstances with dignity and effort." Margaret smiled, a smile that boded nothing good. "What's extraordinary, dear son, is how naive you can be," she said, pulling a photograph from the folder. "Do you recognize this man?" William took the photograph and felt the floor move beneath his feet. The image showed Sarah talking with Richard Collins, his eternal business rival, in what appeared to be a discreet cafe. "This means nothing," he said, although a seed of doubt began to germinate in his mind. "They could have met by chance." "Chance?" Margaret extracted another photograph, this time of Sarah entering the corporate building of Collins Investments. "According to my informant, your friend Sarah has had at least 3 meetings with Richard in the last month. Curiously, coinciding with the period in which you've been sharing confidential information with her, believing she was just a simple cleaner." "I've never shared confidential information," William protested, although he knew that in his conversations with Sarah, he had spoken quite freely about his ideas for the company, believing she had no connection to his world. "Perhaps not intentionally," his mother conceded. "But Richard has always sought any advantage over us. Don't you find it suspicious that suddenly a cleaning employee captures your attention, just when we're about to close the deal with Global Energy?" Doubt, that subtle poison, began to spread through William's mind. Was it possible that Sarah was part of some strategy of Richard's? Had it all been an elaborate manipulation? "I don't believe it," he finally said, but his voice lacked the previous conviction. "I know Sarah. She's not that kind of person." "Do you really know her?" Margaret pressed. "Or do you know the image she has wanted to show you?" "Desperate people do desperate things, William. A single mother with a sick child could easily be manipulated with the right promises." William placed the photograph on the desk, feeling an enormous weight on his shoulders. His instinct told him Sarah was genuine, that the connection they had developed was real. But the evidence presented by his mother planted a seed of doubt that he couldn't completely ignore. "I need time to think," he finally said, heading toward the door. "We don't have time, son," Margaret responded. "The board of directors meets tomorrow to vote on the agreement with Global Energy. If you break with Victoria now, her father will withdraw his support and we'll lose millions. Think of the workers who depend on us, of your father's legacy." William paused at the threshold, feeling the weight of responsibilities he had carried all his life. "I'll think about it," he said before leaving his mother with an expression of calculated satisfaction. Meanwhile, at Memorial Hospital, Sarah was finishing her shift as a nursing student. The last 2 weeks had been difficult. She had tried to immerse herself in work and studies to avoid thinking about William, without much success. His absence left a void that not even she had anticipated, especially for Ethan, who constantly asked about him. "Sarah, there's someone asking for you at reception," another student informed her as she changed in the locker rooms. With her heart racing at the possibility that it might be William, Sarah hurried to the hospital entrance. However, who awaited her was an unknown man, of elegant appearance and a smile that didn't inspire confidence. "Miss James?" the man asked, extending his hand. "Richard Collins. I have a proposal that might interest you." Sarah shook his hand cautiously, not recognizing the name, nor understanding why someone like him would want to talk to her. "What is it about?" she asked directly, with no time for small talk. Richard smiled, appreciating her frankness. "It's about William Harrison," he responded, carefully observing her reaction. "Or should I say William Reed, as he has introduced himself to you?" The color drained from Sarah's face. "Harrison, as in Harrison Enterprises, the company where she worked cleaning." "I don't know what you're talking about," she responded, trying to maintain her composure. "Of course you do," Richard insisted gently. "William Harrison, heir to the Harrison Empire, who has been playing at being a modest financial advisor while earning your trust. Quite elaborate, don't you think?" Each word was like a stab for Sarah. The pieces fit together painfully, the apparent coincidence of their first encounter, the economic resources William always seemed to have despite his supposed modest profession, the foundation that had coincidentally benefited Ethan. "What do you want from me?" she asked, regaining some of her poise. Richard offered her a business card. "I just want to help you, Sarah. William Harrison is an expert manipulator. I've known him since childhood. He's been using you as part of some personal game, probably to rebel against his mother or his fiancée." He made a calculated pause. "Yes, he's still engaged to Victoria Foster. The engagement party that was interrupted has been rescheduled for next month." Sarah mechanically took the card, feeling the world spin around her. It had all been a lie. Every moment, every conversation, every seemingly sincere look, all part of some twisted game in which she had been an unconscious piece. "Why are you telling me this?" she managed to ask. "Because I've witnessed too many people hurt by the Harrisons," Richard responded with calculated sincerity. "And because I believe you deserve the truth. If you ever need help or simply someone to talk to about this, call me." With those words, Richard said goodbye, leaving Sarah paralyzed in the middle of the hospital lobby, holding a business card and the fragments of what she thought she had built with William. That night, while Ethan slept, Sarah cried silently in her small kitchen, feeling a mixture of pain, rage, and shame. How could she have been so naive? How had she not seen the signs? The worst part was the impact on Ethan, who kept asking when he would see William again, unaware of the betrayal his mother had just discovered. The cruelest lies are those disguised as half-truths, those that make us believe we have finally found something authentic in a world of appearances, Sarah thought as she looked at the moon through her window, not knowing that, at that very moment, William was struggling with his own doubts, trapped in a web of manipulations that threatened to forever separate two hearts that, despite everything, had found in each other something genuine and valuable. The boardroom of Harrison Enterprises, with its solid oak table and privileged views of New York, was the scene of a silent battle. William, seated at the head as CEO, listened to presentations about the agreement with Global Energy with an impenetrable expression, while his mind remained tormented by the revelations of the previous day. In the last 24 hours, he had tried to contact Sarah multiple times without success. Each call diverted to voicemail, each message unanswered, reinforced the doubts sown by his mother. Was it possible that Sarah was really collaborating with Richard, or was she simply hurt by his having concealed his true identity? And with this, gentlemen, concludes the presentation of the projected benefits for the merger. The voice of the financial director momentarily returned him to reality. Any questions before proceeding to the vote? The silence in the room was tense. Everyone knew that despite formally being a vote, the final decision would fall to William and his mother, who controlled the majority of the shares. Margaret, seated to his right, gave him a significant look. The presence of James Foster, Victoria's father, and William's future father-in-law according to the matriarch's plans, added pressure to the situation. Before voting, William said, straightening in his seat, "I want to propose an amendment to the agreement." A murmur of surprise went around the table. Margaret narrowed her eyes, visibly tensing. "The solar energy project in Arizona," William continued. "I want us to increase the investment and accelerate its development. I've reviewed the environmental impact studies, and I believe we can make it our flagship renewable energy project." James Foster, a stocky man with graying hair, frowned. "That project is not a priority according to what was agreed, William," he intervened in a grave voice. "Natural gas exploration in the Gulf offers much more immediate returns. At the cost of the environment and our long-term reputation," William calmly rebuffed. "The future is in renewables, not in continuing to exploit fossil fuels." The tension in the room was palpable. All those present understood that this disagreement went beyond the professional. It was the first time William had openly challenged the Fosters' interests, putting at risk not only the business agreement, but also his personal engagement to Victoria. Margaret, a master in the art of business diplomacy, intervened smoothly. "Perhaps we could reach a middle ground. Maintain the priority of the Gulf project, but gradually increase investment in solar energy," she proposed, giving her son a warning look. The discussion continued for the next hour, with technical and financial arguments that barely concealed the true underlying conflict. Finally, a compromise was reached that didn't fully satisfy anyone, but allowed progress. When the meeting ended, William was heading to his office when James Foster intercepted him in the hallway. "A moment, William," he said, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder. "I think we need to talk in private." Once in William's office, with the door closed, James got straight to the point. "Victoria is very excited about the wedding," he began, his conversational tone contrasting with the hardness of his gaze. "She has been very upset since the incident at the engagement party. I worry about her emotional well-being." William maintained his neutral expression, although inwardly he tensed at what he perceived as a veiled threat. "I'm sorry Victoria is going through a difficult time," he responded diplomatically. "But I believe we both need to be sure before taking such an important step." James let out a humorless laugh. "Sure. Marriages like yours aren't based on sentimentality, young man. They're based on alliances, on combined strengths." He made a significant pause. "My influence in the Department of Commerce has been crucial for Harrison Enterprises to obtain certain government contracts. It would be a shame if that influence were exercised in another direction." The threat, barely veiled, ignited something in William. All his life he had accepted the unwritten rules of his world: marriages as transactions, friendships as strategies, feelings as weaknesses. But meeting Sarah, experiencing a genuine connection based on something more than mutual interest, had changed something fundamental in him. "I appreciate your frankness, James," he responded, standing firm. "But I must be equally frank. I won't marry Victoria simply for business convenience. If that means losing certain contracts, I'll be willing to face the consequences." James Foster's face reddened with barely contained anger. "Oh, your father would never have been so reckless," he spat, before heading to the door. "Think about it carefully, William. There's a lot at stake, not just for you." When the door closed behind James, William collapsed into his chair, emotionally exhausted. His phone vibrated with a message from his assistant. Richard Collins had requested an urgent meeting for that same afternoon. Meanwhile, in the modest Queen's apartment, Sarah faced her own crisis. Seated at the kitchen table, she contemplated an official envelope she had just received. The document confirmed that the full scholarship for Ethan at the prestigious New York Conservatory of Music had been approved, including a stipend for a professional violin. Under normal circumstances, it would have been cause for celebration. Ethan would have the opportunity she could never give him on her own. But now, knowing who William Harrison really was, the scholarship felt like another deception, another manipulation. The sound of the doorbell interrupted her thoughts. Upon opening the door, she found herself facing an older woman, elegantly dressed, with an aristocratic bearing that dramatically contrasted with the humble surroundings of the building. "Sarah James?" the woman asked in a firm voice. "I'm Margaret Harrison. I believe we have much to talk about." Sarah paled, immediately recognizing the surname. However, she maintained her composure and, after a moment of hesitation, stepped aside to let the Harrison matriarch in. Margaret surveyed the small apartment with her gaze, evaluating every detail. The modest but well-kept furniture, the nursing books on the table, the photographs of Ethan on the walls. There was no condescension in her expression, but a cold calculation. "I'll be direct, Miss James," she began, rejecting with a gesture the offer of tea. "My son seems to have become infatuated with you, to the point of risking vital business alliances and an advantageous marriage." Sarah, who had expected many things but not this brutal frankness, stood up to her full height. "If you've come to insult me or offer me money to stay away from your son, you can save yourself the effort," she responded with dignity. "I haven't had contact with William since I discovered he had lied to me about his identity." Margaret studied her with renewed interest. "Interesting," she murmured. "Richard Collins gave me to understand that you had some kind of arrangement." "Richard Collins?" Sarah repeated, confused. "I barely know him. He introduced himself yesterday to inform me about William's true identity." A flash of understanding illuminated Margaret's eyes. The pieces fit together differently than she had initially supposed. "It seems we've both been manipulated, Miss James," she finally said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Richard has been trying to sabotage the agreement with Global Energy from the beginning. What better way than to create a conflict between William and the Foster family?" Sarah was beginning to understand the magnitude of the situation in which, without wanting to, she had become involved. "I have nothing to do with your business or your agreements," she stated. "I just want you to leave me and my son in peace." Margaret observed her at length before responding. "You know, you remind me of someone I knew a long time ago," she said in a softer tone. "A young woman who also had unbreakable principles and a dignity that couldn't be bought." Something in the change of tone made Sarah pay more attention. "My husband, Thomas Harrison, was engaged to another woman when we met," Margaret continued, surprising Sarah with this personal revelation. "I was simply the daughter of the company's accountant, without fortune or important connections. But Thomas saw something in me that made him break his engagement, defying his family." Sarah didn't know how to respond to this unexpected confidence. "I don't understand why you're telling me this," she finally said. Margaret stood up, smoothing non-existent wrinkles in her impeccable suit. "Because sometimes, Miss James, what seems a threat to our ordered world turns out to be exactly what that world needs," she responded enigmatically. "My son had never challenged the expectations that weighed on him until he met you. That says a lot." Before Sarah could fully process the meaning of these words, the door opened and Ethan ran in, returning from his music class. He stopped abruptly upon seeing the unknown visitor. "Mom, the teacher says I'm a candidate for the spring recital," he exclaimed, to then add more timidly, "Hello, ma'am." Margaret observed the boy with an expression that Sarah couldn't interpret. Recognition, nostalgia. "Hello, young man," the matriarch responded with unexpected gentleness. "Congratulations on your achievement. Musical talent is a precious gift." Ethan smiled, pleased by the praise, before heading to his room to leave his backpack and violin case. "You have an extraordinary son, Sarah," Margaret commented, using her first name for the first time. "William thinks so too." With these words, she headed toward the door, pausing a moment before leaving. I don't know what will happen between you and my son, she said, looking Sarah directly in the eyes. But I suggest you consider the possibility that, despite the initial lies, what you have found in him is genuine. Sometimes people hide behind false identities precisely to discover who they really are. The door closed behind her, leaving Sarah with more questions than answers, and the unsettling feeling that just when she thought she understood the situation, everything had changed again. The deepest truths often emerge from the rubble of our collapsed certainties, Sarah thought, as she contemplated the scholarship envelope, which she now saw in a completely different light. If Richard Collins had manipulated both her and William for his own ends, was it possible that she had completely misinterpreted William's intentions? At that precise moment, in the offices of Harrison Enterprises, William confronted Richard Collins with a recording that directly implicated him in a plot to sabotage the agreement with Global Energy. The evidence was irrefutable. Richard had manipulated information, approaching both Sarah and Victoria with half-truths designed to sow discord. "You've always been too naive, William," Richard said with a smile that didn't hide his bitterness. "Too concerned with doing the right thing, with being worthy of your father's legacy. Some of us have to fight for every inch of ground in this world. That doesn't justify manipulating innocent lives," William responded, thinking of Sarah and all the unnecessary pain this situation had caused her. Richard shrugged, accepting his defeat with calculated coldness. "You've won this battle, but the business war continues," he said, as he headed toward the door. "And by the way, your cleaning lady has more principles than I expected. She didn't even consider my offer to help her obtain compensation for your deception." Those last words, though spoken with malice, were a ray of hope for William. Sarah had rejected any kind of manipulation, maintaining her integrity even when she had reasons to feel betrayed. Without thinking twice, he took his coat and left the office, ignoring his assistant's calls. The time had come for absolute truth, with no more masks or half-revelations. He only hoped it wasn't too late to repair the damage caused and build something new, something honest, on the ruins of what they had begun under false premises. Evening was falling over New York when William stopped his car in front of the modest apartment building in Queens. He remained a moment in the vehicle, observing the flaking facade and the windows with hanging laundry, so different from the aseptic and luxurious world in which he usually moved. He took a deep breath before getting out. This time there would be no masks, no false identities, no half-truths. He came as William Harrison, with all the complications and privileges that implied, ready to completely open his heart to Sarah. The entrance was open, and he climbed the 4 flights of stairs on foot, mentally rehearsing what he wanted to say. Upon reaching Sarah's apartment, he stopped in front of the door, feeling a nervousness he rarely experienced in board meetings or multi-million-dollar negotiations. He knocked softly. A few eternal seconds passed before the door opened, revealing Sarah with a surprised and cautious expression. "William," she said, adding nothing more, her face impossible to read. "Sarah," he responded, feeling that her name on his lips contained a universe of meanings. "Can we talk?" She hesitated a moment, but finally stepped aside to let him in. The apartment was silent. Ethan must be at some extracurricular activity. "I have half an hour before picking up Ethan from his music class," Sarah informed, maintaining a physical and emotional distance that almost physically hurt William. "I'll be brief then," he responded, deciding not to sit despite Sarah's gesture indicating the sofa. "First, I want to apologize. I lied to you about who I was, and that's inexcusable, regardless of my reasons." Sarah crossed her arms, a defensive posture that contrasted with the vulnerability in her eyes. "Why did you do it?" she asked directly. "What exactly were you looking for with me?" The question, as direct as it was painful, deserved an equally honest answer. "At first, curiosity," William admitted. "You saw what my life was like, surrounded by people who only saw my surname, my position, my fortune. And then you appeared, someone who treated me simply as one more human being, without expectations or hidden agendas. I wanted to experience that, even if briefly." He paused, looking for the exact words. "But what began as curiosity transformed into something deeper. Each conversation, each moment shared with you and with Ethan, showed me a way of life I had never known. Authentic, unpretentious, based on real values, and not on appearances." Sarah maintained her impenetrable expression, although a slight tremor in her jaw betrayed her contained emotion. "It doesn't justify the deception," she finally said. "No, it doesn't," William agreed. "I should have told you the truth much earlier. But I was afraid, Sarah. Afraid that upon knowing who I really was, you would change your way of treating me, that you would raise the same barriers that everyone puts up before William Harrison." He took a step closer, still maintaining a respectful distance. "And then there was Victoria, the engagement, family expectations, an entire life traced by others that I never questioned until I met you." A shadow crossed Sarah's face at hearing Victoria's name. "And now?" she asked, with a tone that tried to be firm but revealed vulnerability. "What has changed?" William let out a soft laugh, without humor. "Everything," he responded simply. "I've broken my engagement with Victoria, I've defied my mother for the first time in my life, and I've reoriented the business strategy toward projects that I truly believe will make the world a better place." Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. "You've broken your engagement?" "Yes," William confirmed. "It should never have existed in the first place. It was a convenience arrangement that I accepted because I had never experienced a real connection with anyone. Until I met you." The silence that followed was charged with tension and possibilities. Sarah seemed to be processing all this new information, recalibrating her perception of the situation and of William. "What about Richard Collins?" she finally asked. "He told me things about you, about your intentions." "Richard was trying to manipulate us both," William explained. "He wanted to sabotage an important business agreement by creating conflict between my family and the Fosters. I have proof of his machinations." Sarah nodded slowly. The pieces fit with what Margaret had implied during her unexpected visit. "Your mother came to see me," she revealed, surprising William. "My mother?" he repeated, trying to imagine Margaret in that modest Queen's apartment. "What did she tell you?" "Curiously, she told me a story about her and your father, and then, instead of threatening me or trying to keep me away from you, as I expected, she almost seemed to give me her approval." William couldn't hide his astonishment. His mother, the calculating and relentless Margaret, giving her blessing to a relationship that defied all the social conventions she herself had defended all her life. "That's unexpected," he managed to say. "For me too," Sarah agreed, allowing herself a small smile that lit up her face like a ray of sunlight after the storm. That brief gesture filled William with hope. "Sarah," he said, taking another step toward her, "I know we started with a lie, and I'll understand if that has destroyed any possibility between us. But I want you to know that what I felt, what I feel for you, is the most real thing I've experienced in my entire life." The wall of defense that Sarah had maintained began to visibly crumble. Her eyes, those brown eyes that had captivated William from the first moment, moistened slightly. "I'm afraid, William," she confessed with a broken voice. "Not just for me, but for Ethan. He's already suffered one abandonment, and he's become attached to you. If this is just a passing whim for you—" "It's not," he interrupted vehemently. "Sarah, I've lived 35 years surrounded by whims and temporary distractions. What I feel for you and for Ethan is different. It's as if I had been sleepwalking my entire life and suddenly awakened." He took a final step, standing just inches from her. "I'm not asking you to blindly trust me after what happened. I'm asking for the opportunity to prove to you day by day that what's between us is worth exploring, with complete honesty this time." Sarah looked him directly in the eyes, as if searching in them for the truth behind his words. What she saw seemed to convince her, because she slowly uncrossed her arms, a subtle but significant sign that her defenses were beginning to lower. "Ethan hasn't stopped asking about you," she finally said, with a small smile. "He was supposed to continue with the piano lessons." "I'd love to keep teaching him," William responded, his face lighting up. "He has extraordinary talent." Another silence ensued, but this one was no longer charged with tension, but with possibilities, with a future that both were beginning to glimpse. "It won't be easy," Sarah warned. "Our worlds are completely different. There will be people who won't understand, who will judge." "Let them judge," William responded with quiet confidence. "I've spent too much time living according to others' expectations. Now, I want to live according to what I feel here." He placed a hand over his heart. In an impulsive but perfectly natural gesture, Sarah closed the distance between them and placed her hand over his, feeling the accelerated heartbeat beneath her palm. "One step at a time, William Harrison," she said with a mixture of caution and hope. "This time without lies, without hidden identities, just you and me, discovering if we can really build something together despite all the differences." William covered her hand with his free one, sealing a silent promise. "One step at a time," he agreed, feeling that for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he should be. The sound of the clock reminded them that Sarah had to pick up Ethan soon. With some reluctance, they separated. "May I accompany you?" William asked. "I'd like to say hello to Ethan, if that's okay with you." Sarah's smile was all the answer he needed. As they left the apartment together, William understood that this was the real turning point in his life. Not the moment he had defied his mother or broken his engagement, but this instant when two people had decided to give themselves a chance, fully aware of the challenges they would face. Sometimes the most beautiful stories begin after all the lies have been revealed and hearts are laid completely bare, William thought, as they descended the stairs, their hands finding each other halfway in a gesture as simple as it was deeply significant. The New York autumn painted Central Park with golden and reddish tones as Ethan ran among the fallen leaves, pursued by William in an improvised game. Sarah watched them from a bench, with a serene smile that reflected the inner peace she had begun to feel in recent weeks. 2 months had passed since that afternoon of confessions and new beginnings. 2 months in which, as they had agreed, they advanced step by step, rebuilding their relationship on foundations of honesty. William had naturally integrated Ethan into this process, dedicating quality time to the boy, without creating false expectations, always respecting Sarah's role as mother and authority figure. "Got you!" William exclaimed, finally catching Ethan and lifting him in the air, provoking genuine laughter from the boy. Sarah observed the scene with a mixture of joy and apprehension. Seeing her son so happy, so connected with William, was wonderful, but also terrifying. Despite all the progress, a part of her still feared that this happiness could be ephemeral, that the differences between their worlds would eventually create insurmountable barriers. "Mum, look how high I am!" Ethan shouted, still suspended in William's arms. "I see you, honey," she responded, standing to join them. "Be careful, don't get dizzy with so many turns." William gently lowered the boy, who immediately ran off toward a group of ducks swimming in a nearby pond. "Don't go too far, Ethan," Sarah warned, then turned to William. "He has so much energy lately, I think the new medications are really working." William nodded, discreetly taking Sarah's hand as they watched Ethan. "Dr. Ramirez mentioned that his lung function has improved significantly," he commented, "and his teachers at the conservatory are impressed with his progress." The mention of the conservatory brought a memory to Sarah's mind. "Speaking of that, I received an invitation to a charity gala organized by the Conservatory Foundation," she said with some hesitation. "Apparently, the parents of scholarship recipients are invited." She felt William tense slightly beside her. Both knew what it meant. It would be the first time Sarah would present herself publicly in William's world, before New York high society, who would undoubtedly be attentive to every detail. "If you don't feel comfortable, there's no obligation," he responded carefully. "I can explain that you have other commitments." Sarah looked at him directly, a determination shining in her eyes. "No, I want to go," she affirmed. "If we're going to try to make this work, we can't indefinitely avoid this part of your life. Besides," she added with a smile, "from what I've been told, the president of the foundation will be there, and I'd like to personally thank him for the opportunity he's given Ethan." William smiled at the irony. Sarah still didn't know that he himself was the president of the foundation, having assumed the position after creating it specifically to help children like Ethan. "I'm sure he'll appreciate your gratitude," he responded, deciding that would be another truth he would have to reveal soon. "And just so you know, I'll be proud to enter that gala with you on my arm." The moment of intimacy was interrupted by Ethan, who returned running with something in his hand. "Look what I found," he exclaimed, showing them an old greenish coin. It was among the leaves, next to the pond. William knelt to better examine the find. "It looks very old," he commented, carefully turning the coin. "It could be from the early 20th century, judging by the design." Ethan's eyes opened in amazement. "Really? Is it a treasure?" "It certainly is," William confirmed. "You know what? I know someone at the Metropolitan Museum who could tell us exactly when it's from." Would you like to visit him? Ethan's enthusiasm was answer enough. As they walked toward the park exit, the boy was a few steps ahead, examining his treasure under different angles of light. "It's amazing how you connect with him," Sarah commented quietly. "You have a natural gift with children." William seemed surprised by the compliment. "I never thought I would have it, to be honest," he confessed. "In my family, children were always seen as small adults in training, not as children, simply. With Ethan, it's different. He reminds me of myself at his age, before the expectations of the Harrison name weighed so heavily." Sarah gently squeezed his hand, now better understanding some aspects of William's personality. His initial rigidity, his constant struggle between duty and desire. The evening passed pleasantly, with an improvised visit to the museum, where the coin turned out to indeed be from the early Republic, though not particularly valuable, and dinner at a pizzeria that Ethan loved. It was a routine they had established, alternating new experiences that William could offer, with the places and activities that were already part of Sarah and Ethan's life. However, the harmony of those moments contrasted with the tensions that continued to exist in other areas of their lives. Margaret, despite her apparent initial acceptance, maintained a reserved attitude toward the relationship. The Fosters, for their part, had not forgiven William for breaking the engagement with Victoria, and used their influence to obstruct certain Harrison Enterprises projects. These conflicts remained mostly invisible to Sarah, as William strived to keep business complications separate from their personal relationship. Nevertheless, some leaks were inevitable, such as when Sarah accidentally overheard a heated telephone conversation between William and his mother about the consequences of his personal decisions. The night of the charity gala arrived sooner than Sarah would have wished. Standing before her bedroom mirror, she nervously contemplated her reflection. The dress, an elegant design in midnight blue that William had insisted on gifting her, after much initial resistance on her part, enhanced her natural figure with a sober elegance. "You look beautiful, Mom," Ethan said from the doorway, already in pajamas and ready to stay with Mrs. Parker. "You look like a princess," Sarah smiled, grateful for her son's unconditional support. "Thank you, my love," she responded, adjusting a lock of hair. "Are you sure you'll be okay with Mrs. Parker? I can stay if you prefer." "No," Ethan protested. "I'm grown up now, and besides, Mrs. Parker promised we'd watch a movie, go and have fun with Will." The sound of the doorbell announced William's arrival. Sarah breathed deeply, trying to calm her nerves. Tonight represented an important step. Their first public appearance as a couple, her first immersion into the social world of the Harrisons. When she opened the door, the vision of William in a tuxedo momentarily left her speechless. It was as if the man she knew and the powerful businessman who had remained in the background during these months merged into a single person. "You are absolutely dazzling," he said, with an admiration that went beyond conventional words. "You don't look bad yourself," she responded, finding her voice and her sense of humor. The journey in William's luxurious car was silent, both immersed in their own thoughts about what this night might mean for their relationship. Upon arriving at the elegant hotel where the gala was being held, Sarah felt her determination momentarily falter at the sight of photographers and evidently wealthy people entering the event. "We can turn around and go to that Italian restaurant you like," William offered, perceiving her unease. Sarah shook her head, straightening in her seat. "No," she said firmly. "This is part of your life, and if we want this to work, I can't avoid it forever." The admiration in William's eyes at this show of courage reaffirmed Sarah's decision. With her head high, she took the arm he offered, and together they crossed the hotel entrance, ignoring the occasional flashes and curious glances. The ballroom was decorated with exquisite taste, with elaborate floral arrangements and a small orchestra playing classical music in a corner. Sarah immediately recognized several public figures, politicians, businessmen, even some celebrities. "William, darling," a female voice intercepted them, just as they had taken a few steps into the ballroom. "What a joy to finally see you at one of these events. We were beginning to think you'd become a hermit." The woman, around 50 and evidently part of New York's elite, directed an evaluating look toward Sarah. "Louise, I'd like you to meet Sarah James," William said with a formality that contrasted with his usual warmth. "Sarah, Louise Mendoza, an old family friend." Sarah extended her hand with a polite smile, noting how the woman evaluated every detail of her appearance. "Pleased to meet you," she said sincerely. Likewise, Louise responded, though her tone suggested otherwise. I must say, William, you've caused quite the stir with your recent changes of plans. The tension in William's jaw was barely perceptible to anyone who didn't know him well, but Sarah noticed it immediately. Plans change when we find what we truly value, Louise, he responded diplomatically. If you'll excuse us, we must greet other guests. As they walked away, Sarah felt William's hand tense slightly on the small of her back. I'm sorry about that, he murmured. Louise has always been particularly traditional in her views. Don't worry, Sarah responded with a serenity that surprised even herself. I knew tonight wouldn't be a walk in the park. As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself navigating a social minefield. Some people, like the conservatory director and his wife, were genuinely kind and seemed to value her for herself. Others barely disguised their curiosity, or in some cases, their barely veiled disdain. During a brief separation from William, who was approached by a group of businessmen, Sarah took refuge by one of the windows, observing the lights of New York shining in the distance. It was there that Margaret Harrison found her. An impressive view, isn't it? The matriarch commented, approaching with a champagne flute in hand. Though I imagine not so different from what you can see from your neighborhood, just from another perspective. Sarah turned to face William's mother, surprised by her approach, but determined to maintain her composure. Every perspective has its value, Mrs. Harrison, she responded calmly. From Queens, you see things that go unnoticed up here. Margaret smiled slightly, appreciating the response. I must admit my son has good taste, she said, evaluating Sarah's bearing in her gala dress. Not only in fashion, but in character. You've handled this evening with a dignity that many of these people, with all their jewels and surnames, will never achieve. The compliment, as unexpected as it was apparently sincere, momentarily disarmed Sarah. Thank you, she responded simply, unsure how to interpret this apparent change in attitude. Don't misunderstand me, Margaret continued, lowering her voice. I still believe you and William will face significant obstacles, but I'm no longer convinced that's necessarily bad for him. Before Sarah could respond, Margaret discreetly took out a small envelope from her purse. This recently came into my possession, she said, handing it to her. I believe it directly concerns you. You can review it in private, but I suggest you do so soon. With those enigmatic words, the matriarch walked away to join another group, leaving Sarah with the envelope in hand and a perplexed expression. She didn't have time to examine it, as William returned to her side, visibly relieved to find her. I'm sorry for leaving you alone, he apologized. Bernardo insisted on discussing the details of the new solar plant. Don't worry, Sarah reassured him. Your mother kept me company. The surprise on William's face was comical. My mother? And you're both still standing with no visible injuries? Sarah smiled at the joke. In fact, I think we might have reached a kind of truce. The evening continued without major incidents, though Sarah noticed that William seemed increasingly thoughtful, as if something were worrying him. When they finally said goodbye and got into the car to return, he remained unusually silent. Is something wrong? Sarah finally asked, concerned about his change in attitude. William seemed to hesitate before responding. Tonight, how did you really feel? He asked. And please, be honest. Sarah considered the question carefully. Out of place, initially, she admitted. As if everyone could see I don't belong in that world. But then I realized something important. I don't need to belong to that world. I just need to find my place beside you, in the space we create together. The visible tension in William's shoulders seemed to diminish at these words. You're extraordinary, did you know that? He said, taking her hand. Most people would try to fit in, change to be accepted. You keep your essence intact. Upon arriving at Sarah's apartment, where Mrs. Parker was waiting with Ethan already asleep, William seemed to have made some kind of decision. There's something else I must confess, he said once they were alone in the small living room. Something about the Conservatory Foundation. Sarah then remembered the envelope that Margaret had given her, still unopened in her purse. Before you say anything, she interrupted him, taking out the envelope. Your mother gave me this tonight. She said it directly concerned me and that I should review it soon. The confusion crossed William's face as Sarah opened the envelope. Inside were several old documents, apparently copies of originals, and a black and white photograph that immediately captured her attention. In the image, two young people smiled at the camera, a handsome man in a suit and a beautiful woman in a simple dress. On the back, an inscription, Thomas and Lucy, New York, 1967. "This is," Sarah began, recognizing in the woman familiar features. "My father," William confirmed, equally surprised. "And that woman looks extraordinarily like my grandmother," Sarah completed with barely audible voice. "Lucy James." The attached documents revealed a forgotten story. Thomas Harrison and Lucy James had been close friends in their youth before social circumstances and family expectations separated them. There were letters, newspaper clippings, and most surprisingly, a legal document that seemed to grant Lucy certain rights over Harrison properties that had never been claimed. "My grandmother never mentioned this," Sarah murmured, turning the pages with trembling hands. "She only said she had known important people in her youth before marrying my grandfather." William seemed equally shocked by the revelation. "My father never spoke of Lucy either," he said. "But this would explain why my mother—" He stopped, as if a piece of the puzzle had suddenly fit. "Why your mother what?" Sarah pressed. "Why she's changed her attitude toward you," William completed. "It's not just that she sees you as a good influence on me. She sees in us an echo of the past, a second chance for a story that could never be." Sarah put the documents on the table, overwhelmed by the implications. "This is too much to assimilate in one night," she confessed. "I need time to process what it means." William nodded, understanding perfectly. "Of course," he said, taking her hands. "But there's something else I need to tell you, something that can't wait any longer." The seriousness in his voice made Sarah look him directly in the eyes. "The foundation that gave Ethan a scholarship," William began. "I created it specifically for him after our first encounter." Instead of the surprise or even indignation that William feared, he saw understanding in Sarah's eyes. "I already suspected it," she admitted. "The dates coincided too perfectly." "And you're not upset?" he asked, genuinely surprised. Sarah reflected a moment before responding. "I would be if you had used the foundation just as a form of manipulation," she explained. "But I've seen how you relate to Ethan, how you genuinely value his talent. The foundation wasn't just to impress me or buy my affection. It was your way of helping a child with potential who needed an opportunity." The precision with which Sarah had interpreted his motivations left William speechless. This woman understood him at a level that no one else had achieved. "Besides," Sarah added with a small smile, "the foundation now helps dozens of children, not just Ethan. You've transformed something personal into a benefit for many. That says a lot about who you really are, William Harrison." In that moment, looking into her eyes in the modest living room of that Queen's apartment, William felt an absolute certainty. He had found his home, not in a place, but in a person. In this extraordinary woman who saw beyond his surname and his fortune to the core of who he really was and who he could become. For the deepest revelations are not those that discover our past, but those that illuminate the path to our future, William thought as he leaned in to kiss her, sealing with that gesture the promise of a tomorrow they would build together, overcoming the barriers that the world insisted on putting between them. The headquarters of Harrison Enterprises buzzed with unusual activity for a Sunday. In the boardroom on the top floor, decorated with contemporary art paintings and exclusive designer furniture, the atmosphere was tense. William, standing by the window, observed New York, while the members of the board of directors took their seats around the imposing mahogany table. Margaret, seated at the head, maintained her usual imperturbable expression, although William could perceive her concern. The events of recent weeks had precipitated this emergency meeting. The Foster family had withdrawn their support for the Gulf project. Several important investors had expressed doubts about the new direction of the company, and rumors about William's relationship with a cleaning lady circulated through New York business circles, damaging the image of stability that the Harrisons had cultivated for decades. "Well, let's begin," Margaret said when everyone was present. "As you know, we face an unprecedented situation that requires decisive measures." Richard Mendoza, the financial director, a 60-year-old man with decades of loyalty to the Harrison family, cleared his throat before speaking. "The numbers are clear," he began, projecting graphs on the room's screen. "Since the announcement of the breaking of the engagement with Miss Foster and the change in strategy toward renewable energy projects, Our stocks have fallen 15%. Investors are nervous, and several government contracts are in danger. William listened without surprise. He had anticipated these consequences when he made the decision to follow his heart and his convictions, breaking with decades of family tradition. "If I may," he intervened, turning to face the board, "renewable energy projects are the future, not only from an ethical perspective, but also an economic one. Markets always react nervously to changes, but in the medium term, we could be bankrupt." Carlos Herrera, one of the most conservative councillors, interrupted him. "William, we all respect your vision, but recent decisions seem to be more influenced by your personal life than by the well-being of the company." The accusation, barely veiled, provoked an uncomfortable silence in the room. Everyone knew what Carlos was referring to: William's relationship with Sarah, which had become public after the charity gala, where photographs of both had appeared in some social magazines. "My personal and professional lives are perfectly separate," William responded firmly. "If you question my ability to lead this company based on whom I choose to share my life with, perhaps you should review your own prejudices, Carlos." Margaret intervened before the discussion escalated. "No one questions your ability, son," she said with that conciliatory tone she reserved for critical situations. "But we must be realistic about perceptions. The image of Harrison Enterprises is linked to that of the family, and abrupt changes generate distrust." William looked at his mother, recognizing the truth in her words, but also the subtle manipulation. Margaret had always been a master in the art of presenting business conveniences as absolute truths. "And what exactly are you proposing?" William asked directly. "That I end my relationship with Sarah? That I sacrifice my personal happiness for the sake of the stocks?" The silence that followed was answer enough. William let out a humorless laugh. "Incredible," he murmured. "After 15 years dedicating every hour of my life to this company, expanding markets, modernizing operations, increasing profits, and now my worth is reduced to whom I decide to be with." He approached the table, placing his hands on the polished surface and looking at each board member. "I propose a deal," he said, with a calmness that contrasted with the internal storm he felt. "I'll temporarily step aside from the executive direction. Margaret can assume the position, while I focus exclusively on the development of the renewable energy division. That way we all get what we want. You recover the stability you so value, and I can dedicate myself to projects I truly believe in without interference." The proposal fell like a bomb in the room. No one, not even Margaret, had expected William to offer to take a step back in the general direction of the company. "Are you sure about this, William?" Ricardo asked, genuinely concerned. "You've been the best CEO this company has had since your father." "Completely sure," William responded, with a determination that left no room for doubt. "Sometimes, to move forward, you have to be willing to let go." The meeting continued, discussing the practical details of this transition, but William barely paid attention. His mind was with Sarah, who at that moment was visiting the Metropolitan Museum with Ethan, unaware of the momentous decision he had just made. 3 hours later, William entered the modest Queen's apartment, where Sarah and Ethan were waiting for him for dinner. The contrast between the opulence of the boardroom he had just left and the simple warmth of that home couldn't be greater. "William," Ethan exclaimed, running to greet him, "we saw the Egyptian mummies today. They're huge, much bigger than they look in books." William knelt to hug the boy, feeling the tension of the day dissipate before his contagious enthusiasm. "What did you think?" he asked, genuinely interested. While Ethan excitedly related his impressions of the ancient Egyptians, Sarah observed William attentively. She knew his expressions well enough to notice that something important had happened. After dinner, when Ethan retired to practice with his violin, Sarah finally addressed the topic. "What happened at the meeting?" she asked directly, sitting next to William on the small sofa. He took her hands, looking for the right words. "I've decided to step aside from the general direction of Harrison Enterprises," he finally said. "I'll continue with the company, but focused exclusively on the renewable energy division." The surprise was clearly reflected in Sarah's face. "Because of me?" she asked, with a mixture of disbelief and guilt. "William, if this is because investors or your family don't approve of our relationship—" "No, Sarah," he gently interrupted her. "And it's not just because of you, although I won't deny that our relationship has been a catalyst. It's for me, for what I want for my life." He stood up, walking to the window from where a portion of the New York sky was visible, dotted with stars barely visible through the light pollution. For years I've directed Harrison Enterprises according to others' expectations. My father, my mother, the shareholders, society, he continued. I've made decisions that benefited the company, but didn't always align with my values. Meeting you, seeing your integrity, your coherence between what you believe and how you live, has made me question everything. Sarah approached, standing beside him. But you've worked so hard to get where you are, she said softly. I don't want to be the reason you give up all that. William turned to look at her, taking her face between his hands with a tenderness that contrasted with the decision in his voice. I'm not giving up, Sarah. I'm choosing. For the first time in my life, I'm consciously choosing what kind of man I want to be, what kind of legacy I want to leave, and that means more to me than any title or business power. The sincerity in his words deeply moved Sarah. This man, born in abundance and privilege, was willing to risk everything for his convictions and for the opportunity of an authentic life. And you won't regret it? She asked, giving voice to her greatest fear. Won't there come a day when you look back and feel you sacrificed too much? The only sacrifice I would regret would be giving up what truly matters out of fear of what others might think, he responded, gently kissing her forehead. My father built an empire, but at the end of his life, do you know what he told me? That he would give all his fortune to have spent more time doing what he truly loved, with the people he truly loved. The sound of Ethan's violin came from the adjacent room, a Vivaldi melody that the boy had been perfecting for weeks. It was a perfect reminder of what truly mattered, not titles or bank accounts, but moments of beauty and genuine connection. Oh, what happens now? Sarah asked after a moment of shared silence. In the short term, a lot of work, William responded with a smile. I have to prove that the renewable energy division can be as profitable as Harrison's traditional businesses. In the long term, he paused as if contemplating a future he was just beginning to glimpse. In the long term, I want to build something meaningful, something that makes a positive difference in the world. And I want to do it with you and Ethan by my side, if you'll allow me. The intensity of his words, the vision he offered of a shared future, made Sarah's heart race. For so long she had struggled alone, building a life for herself and her son with the few tools she had at her disposal. The idea of a travel companion, of someone who would not only share her burdens but also bring his own vision and strengths, was as tempting as it was terrifying. It's a lot to process, she admitted honestly. Everything is happening very fast. William nodded, respecting her reservations. I know, and I don't expect immediate answers, he said. I just want you to know that I'm here, completely present in this, not as William Harrison, the heir or the CEO, but simply as a man who has found something valuable and is willing to fight for it. Sarah rested her head on William's shoulder, feeling a peace that contrasted with the magnitude of the changes they faced. Outside, New York continued its relentless rhythm. Inside, in that small Queens apartment, two people and a child created their own universe, one where social labels and others' expectations lost relevance in the face of the authenticity of shared feelings. True freedom isn't doing what we want, but having the courage to give up what we don't need, Sarah thought, as the night advanced and the melody of Ethan's violin blended with the sound of the city, creating a perfect soundtrack for this new chapter of their lives. What neither could foresee was that this decision, made from the heart and conviction, would trigger a series of events that would test their relationship as never before, when the past would unexpectedly return to claim its place in the present. The Hope Cafe, located on a sunny corner in Brooklyn, was one of those places where different worlds converged. Students with their laptops, elderly people who had been frequenting the establishment for decades, tourists attracted by its authenticity, and neighbors who considered it an extension of their living room. Sarah had chosen this neutral place for the encounter she never thought she would have. Seated by the window, she absent-mindedly stirred her coffee while mentally reviewing the last 6 months. The relationship with William had flourished despite the initial obstacles. Ethan was progressing extraordinarily at the conservatory, and she herself had finished her nursing studies, securing a position at Memorial Hospital thanks to her excellent grades and dedication. Life, at last, seemed to be heading toward a stability she had always yearned for. Until 3 days ago, when a text message shook the foundations of this new normality. "Sarah, it's Jason. I'm in New York and need to see you. It's important. Please." Jason Miller, Ethan's father, who had disappeared 9 years ago when she was 5 months pregnant, now wanted to see her. The news had left her sleepless, debating between indignation, curiosity, and fear of what this reappearance might mean for Ethan, for William, for the life they were building. After much reflection, and a difficult but necessary conversation with William, she had decided to face the past, not for Jason, but for Ethan and for herself, to definitively close that chapter of her life. The doorbell rang, and Sarah looked up. Jason entered the cafe, and for a moment she felt a strange disconnection. It was him, but also a stranger. 9 years had left their mark, some premature grey at his temples, more pronounced expression lines, but the same nervous smile she remembered. "Sarah," he said upon reaching her table, with a voice that revealed uncertainty. "Thank you for coming." She nodded, gesturing for him to sit. The familiarity of his movements, the way he ran his hand through his hair when nervous, awakened memories she thought forgotten. It wasn't love she felt. That feeling had died long ago, but a complex mixture of emotions that she was in no hurry to untangle. "Why now, Jason?" she asked directly, without preambles. "It's been 9 years. Jason accepted the question like someone receiving a deserved blow, briefly lowering his gaze before facing Sarah's accusing eyes. "There's no excuse for what I did," he began, with a sincerity she hadn't expected. "I was young, scared, and I made the most cowardly decision possible. There hasn't been a single day I haven't regretted it." "That doesn't answer my question," Sarah insisted, keeping her voice controlled despite the internal storm. "Why now?" Jason breathed deeply. "I was in California all these years," he explained. "I got a job in construction, rebuilt my life, but always with this pending debt. 6 months ago I had an accident at work. Nothing serious, but while I was in the hospital thinking I could have died without even knowing my son, I knew I had to return, try to repair at least a fraction of the damage I caused." Sarah observed him in silence, evaluating his apparent sincerity. She had rehearsed this moment so many times in her mind, imagined everything she would say, the contempt she would show. But now, faced with him, she mainly felt tiredness, an accumulated tiredness during years of solitary struggle. "Ethan is fine," she finally said. "He's an extraordinary child, talented, sensitive, and he's achieved it without you." "I know," Jason responded, accepting the blow. "I don't intend to appear and claim a place I haven't earned. I just want to meet him, know who he is, let him know I exist, that I didn't abandon him because I didn't care." "And what exactly would you tell him?" Sarah asked, with an edge in her voice. "Sorry I disappeared for 9 years, but now I have remorse, so here I am." Jason took the sarcasm without protest. "I'd tell him the truth," he responded simply, "that I made the biggest mistake of my life by leaving, that I've paid for it every day, and that I don't expect him to forgive me or accept me, but that I'm willing to try if he gives me the chance." The silence that followed was charged with unspoken words, with years of absence impossible to compensate with a conversation. Sarah thought of Ethan, with his innocent smile, how he occasionally asked about the father he never knew. She also thought of William, of the relationship they had built, of how he had become a father figure for the boy, without trying to replace anyone. "Ethan has the right to know who you are," Sarah finally said, surprising Jason with her response. "But this will be on my terms, Jason. I won't allow you to come in and out of his life according to your remorse or convenience." The relief on Jason's face was evident, although mixed with understandable apprehension. "Of course," he nodded quickly. "It will be as you say. I just want the opportunity to meet him, for him to know that his father loves him even though he made the worst mistake of his life." Sarah took a sip of her coffee, which had already gone cold, before continuing. "There's something else you should know," she said, holding his gaze. "I'm in a relationship, a wonderful man who loves Ethan and whom Ethan adores. I won't allow your return to destabilize that." Jason nodded, accepting this information with a mixture of resignation and curiosity. "I'm glad to know you've found someone," he said sincerely. I have no right to expect anything romantic, Sarah. I closed that door myself a long time ago." "Good," Sarah responded, feeling that they were finally speaking with the necessary frankness. "I'll talk to Ethan and to William. I'll call you to arrange a meeting, probably in a neutral place, like a park, and we'll see how it evolves from there." As they said goodbye at the cafe door, with a formal handshake that contrasted with the intimacy they once shared, Sarah experienced a strange sense of closure. Jason's ghost, which had hovered over her life for so many years, now took human form, imperfect, repentant, real. He was no longer the villain of the story, nor the prince who returned. He was simply a man who had made mistakes and sought redemption. Walking toward the bus stop, she called William. She needed his support more than ever for the conversation she would have to have with Ethan that night. What none of them could imagine was that this return would coincide with another unexpected event, the reappearance of Victoria Foster in William's life, with a proposition that would test the foundations of his relationship with Sarah. William's office at the new headquarters of Harrison Renewable Energy was a reflection of the transformation he had experienced in recent months. Large windows that maximized natural light, furniture made of sustainable materials, and photographs of the projects that filled him with the most pride, alongside a framed image of him with Sarah and Ethan during a weekend in the mountains. The company, though smaller than the main conglomerate, had exceeded all expectations. Its innovative solar and wind energy projects were beginning to be internationally recognized, attracting investors who shared his vision of a sustainable future. The personal and professional gamble he had made was bearing fruit, demonstrating that it was possible to align business with personal values. However, the satisfied smile disappeared from his face when his assistant announced the visit he least expected. "Victoria Foster is here, says it's urgent," Maria informed with evident discomfort. William frowned, surprised. Since the breaking of the engagement almost a year ago, his interactions with Victoria had been minimal and strictly professional, always in the presence of third parties during inevitable social events. "Show her in," he finally responded, mentally preparing for whatever might have motivated this unexpected visit. Victoria entered with the elegance that had always characterized her. Her designer suit and impeccable bearing contrasted with the more relaxed atmosphere of William's office. For a moment she seemed out of place, like a piece of classical art in a contemporary art gallery. "William," she greeted with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "thank you for receiving me without prior notice." He nodded, indicating she should take a seat while maintaining a neutral expression. The months of distance had allowed him to see clearly what he had once confused with love, a superficial compatibility based on social expectations and mutual convenience. "How can I help you, Victoria?" he asked directly, preferring frankness to empty formalities. She elegantly crossed her legs, taking a moment before responding. "I have a proposal for you," she began, with a tone that mixed professionalism and something more personal. "My father is considering investing heavily in renewable energies, specifically in projects like yours." William arched an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. James Foster had always been a staunch defender of fossil fuels, considering renewable energies as a passing fad with insufficient returns. "That's unexpected," he commented cautiously. "What has prompted this change in perspective?" Victoria smiled, this time with a flash of their old complicity. "You, in part," she admitted. "Your success with Harrison Renewables has made many reconsider their position, including my father. The numbers don't lie, William. You've proven that sustainability can be profitable." The professional praise was comforting, but William suspected there was something more behind this visit. "And what exactly is the proposal?" he asked, getting to the point. Victoria leaned slightly forward, adopting a more intimate posture. "A merger," she responded. "Foster Investments and Harrison Renewables. We would combine your vision and technical expertise with our financial resources and political connections. We could turn it into the largest renewable energy group in America in less than 5 years." The proposal was tempting from a purely business perspective. The Foster's resources, combined with the innovation and technical knowledge of his team, could dramatically accelerate the expansion William had planned. However, there was an element that didn't fit. "Why now, Victoria?" he asked, studying her expression. "Your father made his position very clear when I broke our engagement. In fact, he used his influence to obstruct several of my initial projects." Victoria had the decency to appear slightly embarrassed. "Circumstances change, people evolve," she responded, carefully choosing her words. "My father has seen the results of your work and recognizes the value. As for me," she made a significant pause, Let's say I've had time to reflect on my priorities. With a deliberately casual movement, she placed her hand over William's. We were always a good team, William, she said softly. Perhaps we rushed into separating. This merger could be an opportunity to reconsider everything. William withdrew his hand with gentleness but firmness, maintaining his serene expression as the pieces fell into place in his mind. Victoria, I appreciate the professional proposal and I'm willing to discuss it with my team, he responded tactfully. But if this includes some kind of personal reconciliation, I must be clear. I am committed to Sarah, I love her, and we've built a life together. Victoria's expression hardened momentarily before recovering her professional composure. Of course, she said with a smile that didn't completely hide her disappointment. I just thought that, given the context of the merger, we could reconsider what worked well between us. After all, she is still... She stopped, but the rest of the sentence was implicit. A nobody, a cleaning lady, someone outside your social circle. Sarah is the woman I love, William affirmed with a quiet certainty, and any professional agreement between our companies won't change that. Victoria rose with elegance, maintaining her dignity intact despite the rejection. Consider the merger proposal at least, she said, recovering the strictly professional tone. I'll have our team send you the details. Think about it, William. You could do much more for the environment with the right resources. After her departure, William remained thoughtful by the window. The proposal was objectively good for the company and for his environmental goals. With the Fosters' resources, they could implement projects that would otherwise take years to materialize. But the personal cost? Would a business alliance with the Foster family inevitably affect his relationship with Sarah? That afternoon, as he drove toward Sarah's apartment, where he now spent most of his nights, professional concerns took a back seat to what Sarah had told him on the phone. Jason, Ethan's father, had returned and wanted to meet his son. The apartment, which had once seemed small by William's standards, now felt like a true home. Sarah's books mingled with his on the shelves. Some of his shirts hung in the closet alongside her dresses, and small details throughout the house, a vase he had bought, photographs of the three of them together, testified to the life they had begun to build together. Ethan was practicing in his room, the sound of the violin creating a perfect soundtrack for the home they had created. Sarah waited for him in the kitchen, preparing dinner with movements that denoted her inner agitation. I spoke with him, she said without preamble when William entered. With Jason. William set down his briefcase and approached her, noticing the tension in her shoulders. Without saying anything, he hugged her from behind, offering his silent support. How did it go? He asked softly. Sarah turned in his arms, seeking in his eyes the security she needed. Better than I expected, and worse than I feared, she responded with a sad smile. He seems genuinely repentant and wants to meet Ethan without grand pretensions. Just to be something in his life. William nodded, processing the information. For months he had been a father figure for Ethan, building a relationship based on shared interests and mutual respect. The idea that the boy's biological father might reappear awakened complicated emotions, understanding of Ethan's right to know his origins, but also an instinctive fear of losing the place he had earned in his life. What have you decided? He asked, knowing that Sarah would have carefully reflected on each possibility. I think Ethan should meet him, she responded. On our terms, supervised, step by step. Jason says he agrees with that. William breathed deeply, assimilating what this would mean for all of them. And when do you plan to tell Ethan? Tonight, Sarah responded, the anxiety evident in her voice. I thought we could do it together, if that's okay with you. I think your presence would make it easier for him and for me. The implicit trust in this request moved William. Despite the complications, Sarah considered him an integral part of this family they had formed, someone whose presence and support were fundamental in important moments. Of course, he responded, gently kissing her forehead. We're in this together, in everything. The conversation with Ethan was as difficult as they expected. The boy listened in silence to Sarah's explanation of who Jason was and why he wanted to meet him now, his expression changing from initial confusion to a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Do I have to call him Dad? Was his first question, directed at Sarah but with a sideways glance at William. No, honey, Sarah responded gently. You can call him Jason. You don't have to do or say anything that makes you uncomfortable. Ethan nodded, processing the information in his own way. At 9 years old, he had a surprisingly mature understanding of complicated relationships. "And you?" he asked, looking directly at William. "Will you still come? Will we continue with our piano lessons?" The question, so simple yet so loaded with meaning, made William kneel to be at the boy's height. "Ethan, nothing is going to change between us," he assured firmly. "I'll still be here. We'll continue with our lessons, with our walks, with everything we do together. Meeting your biological father is important, and I'm happy you have that opportunity, but that doesn't change what you and I have." Ethan's sudden hug, throwing himself into William's arms with surprising strength for his size, was confirmation that his words had touched the boy's heart. That night, after putting Ethan to bed, Sarah and William sat on the small balcony of the apartment, sharing a glass of wine in silence. The city stretched out before them, a sea of lights representing thousands of lives, thousands of stories intertwining. "Victoria came to see me today," William finally said, feeling it was the moment for complete honesty. "The Fosters want to propose a merger with my company." Sarah looked at him, surprised but maintaining her calm. "A merger? That could be good for your projects, couldn't it?" "Potentially, yes," he admitted. "But it comes with complications." Victoria hinted that the merger could also be an opportunity to reconsider our personal relationship. The tension in Sarah's face was visible, but her voice remained controlled. "And what did you tell her?" "That I'm in love with you," William responded simply. "That we've built a life together and that no business merger would change that." Sarah's smile lit up her face, though her eyes reflected the complexity of the moment they were going through. "Here it seems we're both facing ghosts from the past on the same day," she commented, intertwining her fingers with his. "Do you believe in coincidences?" "I believe that life sometimes presents us simultaneously with the past and the future, forcing us to choose," he responded, gently squeezing her hand. "And my choice is you, Sarah. Always." The following days passed in a strange normality, charged with anticipation. The first meeting between Ethan and Jason was scheduled for Sunday in Central Park, a neutral ground where the boy would feel comfortable. Meanwhile, William's legal team analyzed the Foster merger proposal, finding surprisingly favorable terms, but also problematic clauses that suggested an attempt at control by Victoria's family. Sunday morning dawned bright, a perfect spring day in New York. Sarah moved around the apartment nervously, helping Ethan prepare while William made breakfast, trying to maintain an atmosphere of normality. "Will you come with us?" Ethan asked William as he finished his toast. William exchanged a glance with Sarah before responding. "I think this first meeting should be just with your mother," he explained gently. "But I'll be nearby at the cafe next to the park. If you need me, you can call me and I'll be there in a minute." The response seemed to satisfy Ethan, who nodded with the seriousness he sometimes adopted in the face of important situations. As Sarah and Ethan headed to the meeting point, William watched them walk away, feeling a mixture of emotions difficult to name. He fully trusted Sarah, knew she would always put Ethan's well-being above everything, but he couldn't help wondering if Jason's reappearance would alter the delicate balance they had built. In the nearby cafe, he tried to concentrate on the merger proposal documents, but his mind constantly returned to the meeting, taking place just a few hundred meters away. He was so absorbed in his thoughts that he didn't immediately notice the presence that materialized before him. "William," Margaret's voice startled him. "What a coincidence finding you here." His mother, impeccable as always even on a Sunday, took a seat across from him without waiting for an invitation. Her sharp gaze evaluated the documents on the table, immediately recognizing the Foster Investments logo. "I see you're considering the merger proposal," she commented, with that unique ability to make an observation sound like a judgment. An interesting move after everything that's happened. William closed the folder, facing his mother directly. "Coincidence, Mother, or have you been following my movements?" Margaret smiled slightly, not bothering to deny the accusation. "Let's say I keep myself informed about matters that affect the family," she responded calmly. "And this merger could have significant implications for all of us." "It's my company, my decisions," William responded, maintaining a respectful but firm tone. "Of course," Margaret conceded. "But allow me an observation. The Fosters never propose agreements without ulterior motives. If they offer you this merger in apparently favorable terms, It's because they have a greater plan. William studied his mother, recognizing the sharpness that had made her one of the most respected businesswomen in America. What exactly do you know? Margaret took a sip of the coffee she had just ordered before responding. James Foster has been maneuvering to obtain a position in the new administration, she revealed. Secretary of Energy, according to my sources. If he gets it, he'll control the regulation that will directly affect your sector. The revelation fit perfectly with some of the most problematic clauses of the agreement, which gave the Fosters decision-making power over certain strategic aspects of the merged company. And Victoria is part of this strategy, William concluded, finally seeing the complete picture. Victoria has always been the perfect executor of her father's ambitions, Margaret confirmed. Although I suspect her feelings for you aren't completely feigned. In her way, I think she truly appreciates you as a valuable asset. William smiled humorlessly at the clinical description of what he once considered a meaningful relationship. Why are you telling me this? He asked directly. I thought you would approve of this merger, that you would see the business advantages above everything else. Margaret looked at him with an expression she rarely showed, genuine vulnerability mixed with something that could be interpreted as maternal pride. Because I've seen you change this past year, William, she responded with unexpected frankness. I've seen you become the man I always knew you could be. Determined, faithful to your principles, capable of taking risks for what you truly value. And because, contrary to what you might think, I want you to be happy. The sincerity in her voice momentarily left William speechless. Relations with his mother had always been complicated, marked by expectations and judgments more than by direct expressions of affection. Sarah and Ethan are in the park, he said after a moment. Ethan's biological father has returned after 9 years, and today is their first meeting. Sharing this personal information with his mother was a significant step, a show of trust that Margaret seemed to appreciate. And you're here, waiting, she asked, with genuine curiosity. Giving them space but available if they need me, he explained. It's the right thing. Margaret nodded slowly, observing her son with new eyes. You know, she said after a moment, your father would be proud of the man you've become, not for your business achievements but for this, for your capacity to love and support without possessing, for your willingness to be present without imposing. His mother's words, as unexpected as they were powerful, touched a deep fiber in William. His father's legacy had always weighed on him, an invisible rod against which he measured his own actions and decisions. Thank you, Mom, he said simply, using the affectionate term he rarely employed with her. The moment of connection was interrupted by the sound of his phone, a message from Sarah. It went well. Ethan is calm but wants to see you. Can you meet us at the bandstand? William stood up, quickly gathering the documents. I have to go, he told his mother. They need me. Margaret nodded, making a gesture of understanding. Go, she said simply. And William, she added as he was already turning to leave, decide with your heart, not just your head. It's advice I should have followed a long time ago. The park was full of families enjoying the spring Sunday. William walked quickly toward the bandstand where he spotted Sarah and Ethan sitting on a bench. Jason was no longer with them. Ethan was the first to see him, running to meet him with an expression that mixed relief and excitement. William, he exclaimed, clinging to his waist in a hug. I met him. My biological dad. William knelt to be at his height, noting the careful distinction the boy had made. And how was it? He asked with genuine interest. It was weird, Ethan responded with the direct honesty of childhood. He looks a bit like me, or I like him, and he plays guitar. He showed me pictures. He said he could teach me if I want. William nodded, maintaining an open and receptive expression as he listened to Ethan process this significant encounter. I told him you teach me piano, the boy continued, and that we do lots of things together. He didn't get mad or anything. He said he was glad I had someone like you. The boy's sincerity, his ability to navigate this complex situation without losing his naturalness, deeply moved William. I'm glad it went well, he said, affectionately ruffling his hair. How do you feel? Ethan seemed to consider the question seriously. Good, I think, he finally responded. It's good to know where I come from. But, he looked toward Sarah, who was slowly approaching to give them space. But my family is Mum and you. That doesn't change. The simple but profound words of the boy crystallized in that moment, everything William had been considering: the merger proposal, the Fosters' manipulations, business ambitions. Everything paled in comparison to what truly mattered. This family they had built together, based not on blood or convenience, but on genuine love and the conscious choice to be present in each other's lives. When Sarah joined them, William made a decision that, in retrospect, was the only possible one. He would reject the merger with the Fosters, would find another way to grow his vision, and, most importantly, he would take the step he had been considering for weeks, but now knew with certainty was the right one. That night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, William took Sarah's hands in the small living room of the apartment. "These months with you and Ethan have been the most meaningful of my life," he began, with a voice that revealed the depth of his feelings. "I've learned what truly matters, what I really want to be and build." Sarah looked at him with a mixture of love and curiosity, perceiving that something important was about to happen. "Today I've made two decisions," William continued. "The first is to reject the merger with the Fosters. I'll find another way to grow the company, one that doesn't compromise our values or our integrity." Sarah nodded, gently squeezing his hands in a sign of support. "And the second," William breathed deeply before continuing, "is to ask you to marry me. Not for convenience, not for social expectations, but because I love you, because I love Ethan, because I want to build a life together, officially as the family we already are in our hearts." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as William took a small ring from his pocket. It wasn't ostentatious, as might be expected from a Harrison. It was elegant in its simplicity, with a blue stone that recalled the color of the dress she wore the night they met. "William," she began, her voice broken by emotion. "You don't have to answer now," he hastened to clarify. "I know it's an important step, and with everything that's happening with Jason and Ethan—" "Yes," Sarah interrupted him with a smile that illuminated her entire face. "Yes, I want to marry you. I want us to build this life together, officially, completely." The kiss that followed was a promise, a pact between two people who had found in each other not only love, but the best version of themselves. Sometimes the most important choices are not between good and bad, but between what is convenient and what is true, between the life expected of us and the life our heart yearns for, William thought as he held Sarah in his arms, feeling that he had finally found his true purpose. Dawn painted the white walls of the small house on the outskirts of New York with gold. William observed from the window how the rising sun transformed the modest garden into a tapestry of vibrant colors. The roses that Sarah tended with dedication, the sunflowers that Ethan had planted as a school experiment, and the fruit trees that he himself had carefully selected to provide shade and food. A year had passed since that night when he proposed to Sarah in the small Queen's apartment. A year of profound changes, of adjustments and growth, of patient construction of a shared life. Moving to this house had been the first step. It wasn't a mansion like William could have afforded, but a spacious yet cozy home, with a garden for Ethan and a study where Sarah could study for her specialization in pediatric nursing. They had chosen it together, representing the balance they had found between their worlds. Neither the unnecessary opulence of William's environment nor the limitations of Sarah's old apartment. The sound of soft footsteps pulled him from his reflections. Sarah approached, wrapped in a silk robe, a small luxury he had gifted her, and hugged him from behind. "Awake so early on our anniversary," she murmured, resting her cheek against William's back. "Nervous about today?" He turned to properly embrace her, tenderly kissing her forehead. "Not nervous," he responded, "just reflective. It's been an extraordinary year." Sarah smiled, recognizing in his gaze the depth of feelings that he sometimes struggled to express in words. "The best year of my life," she confirmed, "despite all the challenges." And certainly they had faced challenges. William's decision to reject the merger with the Fosters had had significant professional consequences. James Foster, as Margaret had predicted, had been appointed Secretary of Energy, and his influence had been felt in the form of regulatory obstacles and lost contracts. Harrison Renewables had survived thanks to William's vision and the unexpected support of his mother, who had personally invested in the company when other investors withdrew. In the personal realm, Jason's integration into Ethan's life had required patience and adjustments. After the initial meeting, they had established regular but limited visits. William, far from feeling threatened, had found a way to support this new dynamic, recognizing the importance for Ethan of knowing his roots. The wedding held 6 months ago had been intimate but meaningful. In a botanical garden, surrounded only by their closest loved ones, they had exchanged vows that weren't empty promises, but confirmations of what they had already demonstrated through actions. Their commitment to support each other, to grow together, to build a family based on respect and true love. "Do you think many people will come?" Sarah asked, referring to the event they would be celebrating that afternoon. The official inauguration of the Ethan Foundation, a non-profit organization created to provide musical education and medical care to children from families with limited resources. "It doesn't matter how many come," William responded. "What matters is what it represents, what we'll be able to achieve." The foundation was the perfect materialization of their shared vision. It combined William's business expertise, Sarah's medical training, and the passion for music that had united their family from the beginning. Naming it in honor of Ethan had been William's idea, an acknowledgement of the boy whose musical talent had been the catalyst for so many positive changes. The sound of a violin melody came from Ethan's room, who at 10 years old showed a mastery of the instrument that impressed even his teachers at the conservatory. "Seems like someone else is awake early," Sarah commented with a smile. "Practicing for this afternoon, surely." Ethan would play at the inauguration, a particularly significant violin solo, the piece he had performed at that first recital William attended, the moment when their lives truly began to intertwine. The morning passed in a pleasant family routine. Shared breakfast with Ethan, animatedly recounting his expectations for the day, William reviewing the final details of the inauguration, Sarah preparing the speech she would give as the foundation's medical director. Mid-morning, the doorbell announced the first visit of the day. Margaret, punctual as always, elegant but with a less rigid style than she used to wear during her years as director of Harrison Enterprises. "Grandma!" Ethan exclaimed, running to hug her. The change in Margaret was perhaps one of the most surprising of all. The severe matriarch had found in her role as grandmother a warmth that few had seen before. Her relationship with Sarah, initially tense, had evolved toward a mutual respect that occasionally showed flashes of true affection. "I bring something for the inauguration," she announced, handing William an elegant envelope. "A small additional contribution for the foundation." The small contribution turned out to be a substantial donation that would allow expanding the music scholarship program to 3 more cities. But more significant than the check was the attached document, the deed to a property in downtown New York that had belonged to Thomas Harrison. "This property," Margaret explained with a seriousness that contrasted with her usual pragmatism, "was going to be a gift from your father to Lucy James, Sarah's grandmother. He never got to give it to her, due to circumstances we all know. It seems appropriate that it now houses the headquarters of a foundation that unites both families." The revelation moved both William and Sarah. It was as if a circle were closing, as if destiny finally corrected an ancient injustice. "Mother," William began, without words to express what this gesture meant. "It's the right thing," Margaret responded simply. "Thomas would have wanted it this way." The afternoon arrived with a perfection that seemed orchestrated by the universe itself. The space chosen for the inauguration, an old restored theater in a popular New York neighborhood, filled with an unusual mixture of attendees, executives in expensive suits, alongside families of the foundation's first beneficiaries, politicians and artists, doctors and musicians, worlds that rarely crossed united by a shared vision. Jason, Ethan's biological father, discreetly attended, keeping himself in the background but present to support his son at this important moment. His reintegration into Ethan's life had been gradual and respectful, finding a balance that allowed the boy to benefit from this additional connection without creating conflicts of loyalty. The culminating moment of the ceremony came when Ethan took the stage with his violin. Dressed with simple elegance, the boy showed a confidence and serenity that revealed his growth not only as a musician, but as a person. The first notes of Vivaldi filled the theater, transporting all those present to that first recital where William had been captivated by the young violinist's talent. Sarah, seated next to William in the front row, took his hand as tears of pride welled in her eyes. In that perfect moment, she remembered the long road traveled, the difficulties as a single mother, the endless work days, the sacrifices, the doubts. And now, This luminous present that wasn't a fairy tale happy ending, but a new beginning built on brave decisions and true love. After Ethan's performance, which received a standing ovation, came the time for official speeches. William took the stage, followed by Sarah. Together, as the couple they now were, they presented the Foundation's vision, a bridge between worlds, an opportunity for talent to flourish regardless of socio-economic circumstances. Just over 2 years ago, William began, looking directly at Sarah as he spoke, I met a woman who changed my perspective of the world. She taught me that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the authenticity with which we live, in the integrity of our decisions, in the ability to remain true to ourselves despite external pressures. Sarah continued, her voice firm despite the emotion. And I met a man who showed me that social barriers are illusory when the heart recognizes its home. That differences can be bridges instead of walls, when there is mutual respect and willingness to learn from each other. Together, they concluded, the Ethan Foundation is born from this conviction, that we all deserve the opportunity to develop our potential, to find our voice, to contribute to the world with our unique gifts. That music, like love, doesn't distinguish social classes or origins, but flourishes where it finds fertile ground and proper nurturing. The applause that followed was deafening, but for William and Sarah, the true triumph was Ethan's radiant smile, who watched them from the side of the stage with pride and love. The subsequent reception was a celebration not only of the foundation, but of the human connections that had made it possible. In a moment of calm, William found Sarah contemplating the theatre's garden from a secluded terrace. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, offering her a glass of champagne. She smiled, that gesture that still accelerated his heart after 2 years. "About how life takes turns," she responded. "About how something that seemed like a disaster, like spilling champagne on Victoria's dress at that party, can be the beginning of something beautiful. About how our paths, so different, were destined to cross." William nodded, understanding perfectly. "Do you know what I admire most about you?" he asked, gently caressing her cheek. "Your ability to keep your essence intact despite all the changes. You're still the same Sarah I met, with the same integrity, the same strength, only now you shine even more. And you're still the same William," she responded. "Only now you allow yourself to be who you truly are, without the layers of expectations that others put on you." The sound of children's laughter came from the garden, where Ethan played with other children, some from wealthy families, others beneficiaries of the foundation, all equal in their carefree joy. "I think we've created something beautiful," William commented, observing the scene. "Not just the foundation, but all this, our life together." "We have," Sarah confirmed, leaning against him, "and this is just the beginning." As if to seal this promise, William took from his pocket a small object he had been saving for this moment. An old key, clearly symbolic. "What is this?" Sarah asked, taking it with curiosity. "The key to the property my mother donated today," he explained. "It belonged to my father, who intended it for your grandmother. Now it will be the headquarters of our foundation, but also something more, a symbol of how true love, though sometimes it must wait generations, always finds its way." Sarah closed her hand around the key, feeling its historical and symbolic weight. "A bridge between worlds," she murmured, repeating the words they had used in their speech. "Say exactly," William confirmed, embracing her as they contemplated the future that opened before them, a future built not on overcome differences, but on the shared values they had discovered in their journey together. Sometimes the most beautiful stories are not those where two perfect people meet in ideal circumstances, but where two imperfect souls have the courage to truly see each other, to consciously choose each other every day, and to build together something greater than themselves, William thought as the sun began to set over New York, bathing the scene with a golden light that seemed to bless this new chapter of their lives. In the garden, Ethan looked up and waved at them with a radiant smile. Sarah and William responded in unison, two people who had found in each other not only love, but also the courage to be authentic, to challenge conventions, to build bridges where others saw only insurmountable walls. That night, as they returned to their home, the small family shared a moment of perfect stillness in the garden, under a starry sky that seemed infinite in its possibilities. Ethan, between them, pointed out constellations he had learned in school. Sarah and William, hand in hand, felt that deep peace that only comes when one is exactly where one should be, with the people who are meant to share one's path. And so, under the same sky that had witnessed their first encounter, they sealed without words a promise that transcended any formal vow. They would continue building together, day by day, a love that knew no social boundaries, a home where each could be authentically who they were, and a legacy that would extend that same spirit of possibility to many others.